Hello and welcome back to our channel. We share stories here, anonymous confessions, echoes of real lives, whispered secrets from the heart. These aren't just stories, they're fragments of truth, experiences shared with us by people just like you, navigating the complex landscape of relationships. Before we begin, if you find these stories resonate with you, if you appreciate hearing these raw, honest accounts, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support truly means the world and helps us bring more of these voices to light. Thank you. It all started like a dream, you know? Like one of those movies where everything just clicks into place, effortlessly, perfectly. Sarah and I, we met in college, that cliché, right? But for us, it felt anything but. It was instant. Like recognizing a part of yourself you never knew was missing, suddenly appearing right there in front of you. Her laugh, God, her laugh could light up a whole room. It was bright, unrestrained, and it made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't know what was funny. And her eyes, they were this incredible shade of green, flecked with gold when the sun caught them just right. I remember the first time I really looked into them, I felt like I could see right through to her soul. Sounds cheesy, I know, especially now, looking back with all the bitterness and hurt clouding my memories. But back then it was real. It felt profoundly, undeniably real. We were young, ambitious, full of that naive optimism that only youth can provide. We shared dreams, big, audacious dreams of conquering the world, or at least our little corner of it. We'd spend hours talking, just talking about everything and nothing. Future plans, silly childhood memories, philosophical debates that went nowhere but felt important at the time. She understood me, or at least I thought she did. Better than anyone ever had. And I felt like I understood her too, the quirky little things that made her, her. The way she always had to have the last word even if she knew she was wrong. The way she could get lost in a book for hours, oblivious to the world around her. The way she'd always leave a trail of bobby pins wherever she went. Little things, insignificant on their own, but woven together, they created this tapestry of intimacy, of knowing, of belonging. Our early years of marriage were idyllic. Honestly, that's the only word for it. We were living in a small apartment, barely making ends meet, but we were happy. Truly happy. Every day felt like an adventure, even the mundane ones. Grocery shopping together was an event. Cooking dinner was a shared project, often ending in laughter and a slightly messy kitchen. Weekends were for exploring the city, discovering hidden cafes, wandering through parks, just being together. Love was a warm fire that seemed to burn brighter with each passing day. We built a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment, fueled by love and laughter and a shared vision for the future. We talked about everything, or so I believed. We discussed our finances openly, we made joint decisions, we supported each other's careers. When I had a setback at work, she was my rock, my cheerleader, the one who believed in me even when I doubted myself. When she felt overwhelmed by her own pressures, I was there to listen, to offer comfort, to remind her of her strength. We were a team, a partnership, two halves of a whole, perfectly balanced, perfectly in sync. Or so I thought. Perhaps that's the biggest lie we tell ourselves in relationships, isn't it? That illusion of perfect balance, of unwavering harmony. Maybe it's just a phase, a beautiful, fleeting moment before the cracks start to appear. Looking back now, trying to pinpoint where it all started to unravel, it's like trying to catch smoke. There wasn't one big explosion, no dramatic fight that signaled the beginning of the end. It was more subtle, more insidious. A gradual fading of the light, a slow chilling of the once warm fire. But in those early years, bathed in the golden glow of new love and shared dreams, I was blind to any potential storm clouds on the horizon. I was complacent, perhaps. Comfortable, definitely. I believed in us, in our love, in the unbreakable bond we had forged. Was that happiness really as sustainable as I thought? Or was I just too naive to see the fault lines forming beneath our seemingly solid foundation? Perhaps I was too complacent, too trusting, too willing to believe in the fairy tale we had created for ourselves. Maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe that's where it all began to slip away. The change, when it came, wasn't a sudden thunderclap. It was more like a slow leak, a tiny puncture in a tire that you barely notice at first, but gradually, imperceptibly, the pressure starts to drop. It began with small things, almost insignificant in isolation, but when you string them together, looking back, they paint a different picture. A picture of a slow, quiet withdrawal. Sarah started spending more time at work, or so she said. Late nights became more frequent, weekend work became the norm. Initially, I was supportive, even proud of her dedication. She was climbing the corporate ladder, finally getting the recognition she deserved for her hard work and talent. But then the story started to shift subtly. Details became vague, explanations less coherent. When I asked about her day, the answers became shorter, less descriptive. "Just work stuff," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand, turning away to her phone or the television. Conversations that used to flow effortlessly like a clear stream became stilted, awkward, like wading through mud. The easy banter, the shared jokes, the comfortable silences, they started to disappear, replaced by a strained politeness, a forced normalcy that felt anything but normal. Our evenings together, once filled with laughter and connection, became separate. We'd sit on the couch, side by side but worlds apart. She'd be engrossed in her phone, scrolling through social media, barely glancing up when I spoke. I'd try to initiate conversations to bridge the growing gap, but my attempts often fell flat, met with monosyllabic responses or distracted nods. The silence in our apartment, once comfortable and companionable, became heavy, oppressive, filled with unspoken words and growing distance. It felt like a physical barrier, a wall slowly rising between us, brick by silent brick. Intimacy, both emotional and physical, started to wane. The passionate kisses, the tender touches, the lingering hugs, they became less frequent, less heartfelt. When we did make love, it felt different. Mechanical almost, like she was going through the motions, fulfilling an obligation, rather than sharing a moment of genuine connection. The spark, that vibrant, fiery spark that had once defined our intimacy, seemed to have flickered and died, leaving behind only embers, cold and gray. I tried to talk to her about it, gently, tentatively. "Is everything okay?" I'd ask, my voice hesitant, laced with a growing anxiety. "You seem distant lately." But she'd brush it off, dismiss my concerns with a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just stressed with work, honey," she'd say. "It's just a phase. It'll pass." And I, desperate to believe her, wanting to cling to the hope that everything was still okay, I'd accept her explanation, pushing down the nagging doubts that started to surface in the back of my mind. Her habits changed too. She became more secretive with her phone, always keeping it face down, taking calls in another room, changing her passwords. Little things again, but they added up. They created a sense of unease, a feeling that something was being hidden, something I wasn't supposed to see. I started to feel like an outsider in my own marriage, like I was watching Sarah through a glass wall, seeing her but unable to truly reach her, to understand what was going on behind that increasingly impenetrable facade. I tried to ignore the signs, to rationalize them away. Stress at work, yes, that was plausible. Everyone goes through phases, right? Relationships have their ups and downs. Maybe I was just being paranoid, overreacting. Maybe I was imagining things, seeing shadows where there were none. I told myself to be patient, to be understanding, to give her space. I convinced myself that this was just a temporary rough patch, a small bump in the road that we would navigate together just like we always had. But deep down, a knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. A cold, unsettling feeling that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. And the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it seemed to scream in the silence between us. The silence that was no longer comfortable, no longer companionable, but filled with a growing, unspoken dread. The signs were there, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. But I, blinded by love, by trust, by a desperate hope that everything was still okay, I chose not to see them. Or perhaps, more accurately, I chose not to acknowledge what my gut was already screaming at me. The subtle signs, the little changes, they started to coalesce, to form a pattern, a picture that I could no longer ignore. The nagging doubts that I had tried to suppress began to grow, to fester, like a wound that wouldn't heal. The unease in my stomach intensified, morphing into a persistent, gnawing anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was slowly slipping away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The late nights at work continued, but now they were accompanied by new excuses, new inconsistencies. Business trips that seemed to materialize out of thin air, conferences she hadn't mentioned before, meetings that ran until the early hours of the morning. Her explanations became increasingly convoluted, harder to follow, laced with a defensiveness that was unlike her. When I gently questioned her, my voice careful, non-accusatory, she'd become irritable, snapping at me, accusing me of being controlling, of not trusting her. "Why are you always interrogating me?" she'd demand, her voice sharp, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you trust me?" And I, caught off guard by her vehemence, by the sudden shift in her demeanor, would back down, apologizing, trying to smooth things over, even though a part of me knew instinctively that something was being deliberately hidden. The secrecy surrounding her phone became even more pronounced. It was always glued to her hand, or locked away in her purse when she wasn't using it. She'd jump if I even glanced in its direction, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I started to notice hushed phone calls taken in the bathroom, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Texts that arrived late at night, accompanied by a secretive smile, a furtive glance around to make sure I wasn't watching. It was like she was living a double life, one with me and one hidden, shrouded in secrecy, accessible only through that small rectangular device that had become her constant companion. That's when the suspicion truly began to germinate. It started as a tiny seed of doubt, planted in the fertile ground of my growing unease. But with each passing day, with each new inconsistency, with each evasive answer, that seed began to sprout, sending tendrils of suspicion winding their way through my thoughts, poisoning my peace of mind. I started to replay past events in my head, searching for clues, for moments that I might have missed, for signs that I had been too blind to see. Suddenly, innocuous incidents took on a new, sinister meaning. A casual mention of a colleague's name, a late-night text message that I had dismissed as unimportant, a weekend trip she had taken with friends, all of these things now seemed to point in a different direction, a direction I was terrified to acknowledge but couldn't completely ignore. The internal conflict was agonizing. Part of me desperately wanted to believe her, to trust her, to cling to the remnants of the love we had once shared. I wanted to dismiss the suspicions as paranoia, as my own insecurities getting the better of me. I wanted to believe that everything was still okay, that we could still salvage what we had, that this was just a temporary detour on the road of our marriage. But another part of me, a more rational, more perceptive part, knew that something was fundamentally broken. That the changes in Sarah were too profound, too consistent to be explained away by stress or work pressures. That there was a darkness creeping into our relationship, a shadow that threatened to engulf everything we had built together. The thought of infidelity, of Sarah being with someone else, was like a physical blow to the stomach. It was a pain so sharp, so visceral that it took my breath away. But as much as I dreaded the possibility, as much as I wanted to bury my head in the sand and pretend it wasn't happening, the suspicion wouldn't go away. It gnawed at me day and night, whispering insidious doubts in my ear, poisoning my thoughts, eroding my trust. I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know the truth no matter how painful it might be. But the fear of what I might discover, the fear of confirming my worst suspicions, was almost paralyzing. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that the only way to find out what lay below was to jump. And I was terrified of falling. Terrified of the truth. But the gnawing suspicion was becoming unbearable. I had to know. I had to find out what was really going on. The decision to actively seek the truth wasn't easy. It felt like a betrayal of sorts, a violation of the trust that was already crumbling between us. But the alternative, to remain in the dark, consumed by suspicion, slowly suffocating in a cloud of uncertainty, was even worse. I knew I couldn't live like that anymore. I needed answers, even if those answers shattered everything I held dear. It started subtly, almost hesitantly. I began paying closer attention to Sarah's phone habits, trying to decipher the patterns, to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that would confirm or deny my suspicions. It felt invasive, wrong, like I was trespassing on her privacy, but the desperation to know the truth outweighed my moral qualms. I'd wait until she was in the shower or asleep, then I'd cautiously, guiltily pick up her phone, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling slightly. But it was always locked, protected by a password I didn't know. She was meticulous, careful, leaving no openings for me to. Frustration mounted, mixed with a growing sense of desperation. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, constantly hitting dead ends, feeling more and more lost in a labyrinth of deceit. I started checking our shared computer, hoping to find some clues there. Emails, browsing history, social media accounts, anything that might shed light on her secretive behavior. Again, I felt a pang of guilt, a sense of shame for snooping, for violating her privacy. But the need to know, the burning desire to uncover the truth, pushed me forward. I spent hours poring over digital trails, searching for any indication of infidelity. Deleted messages, hidden folders, suspicious websites. I scrutinized everything, my eyes straining, my mind racing, piecing together fragments of information, hoping to find a coherent picture. But the digital breadcrumbs were scarce, carefully erased, leaving me with more questions than answers. Then came the tracking. It was a dark moment, a point where I crossed a line I never thought I would cross. But desperation can drive you to do things you never imagined yourself capable of. I installed a tracking app on her car, a small magnetic device hidden beneath the chassis, allowing me to monitor her movements. The guilt was immense, suffocating. I felt like a spy in my own life, a shadow lurking in the corners of my marriage, violating everything I once believed in. But the need for certainty, the desperate craving for truth, overshadowed my moral compass. I needed to know where she was going, who she was meeting, what she was doing during those late nights and weekend trips. The tracking data was revealing. It showed patterns, routes, destinations that didn't align with her work excuses. Addresses I didn't recognize, locations far from her office, places she had never mentioned. My heart sank with each new revelation, each new piece of evidence that confirmed my worst fears. The data points painted a picture of deception, of secret rendezvous, of a life lived in the shadows, hidden from me. The digital trail was leading me down a path I didn't want to tread, but I couldn't turn back now. I was too far in, too invested in uncovering the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. One evening, the tracker showed her car parked outside a small, nondescript apartment building in a part of town she had no reason to be in. It was late, well past midnight, and her car had been there for hours. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a sickening certainty that this was it, this was the place, this was where the truth lay hidden. Driven by a mixture of desperation and a morbid curiosity, I drove to the location, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my stomach churning with anxiety. Parked a block away in the shadows, I watched the building, my eyes fixed on the entrance. And then I saw him. A man I vaguely recognized, a colleague from her office, leaving the building, getting into his car and driving away. Moments later, Sarah emerged, her face pale, her eyes downcast, getting into her own car and driving in the opposite direction. The confirmation was brutal, undeniable. The evidence was irrefutable. My world, the world I had built with Sarah, the world I thought was solid and unbreakable, shattered into a million pieces right before my eyes. The trail had led me to the truth, a truth more devastating, more painful than I could have ever imagined. Seeing her emerge from that apartment building, seeing him leave just moments before, it wasn't just evidence, it was a visceral punch to the gut. All the suspicions, all the anxieties, all the sleepless nights, they crystallized into a single devastating moment of clarity. There was no more doubt, no more room for denial. The truth was staring me in the face, cold, hard, and undeniable. My wife, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart and my life, was having an affair. And the man, it was Mark, her colleague, the one she had mentioned casually in passing a few times, the one I had never suspected in a million years. The initial reaction was shock. A numb, disbelieving shock that left me feeling detached from reality, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life, not my own. My mind struggled to process what I had just witnessed, to reconcile the image of Sarah leaving that apartment building with the image of the woman I thought I knew. It was like two different people, two different realities colliding, leaving me reeling in a state of cognitive dissonance. For a few moments I just sat there in my car, parked in the shadows, staring blankly ahead, my mind completely empty, devoid of thought, devoid of emotion. Just numb. Then the shock began to give way to a torrent of emotions, a chaotic maelstrom of pain, anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Pain, sharp and piercing like a physical wound tearing through my chest. Anger, hot and volatile, surging through my veins, making my hands clench into fists, my jaw tighten, my breath come in ragged gasps. Betrayal, a deep, profound sense of violation, of having my trust shattered, my heart trampled upon, my entire foundation of love and commitment reduced to ashes. And disbelief, a lingering, desperate refusal to accept the reality of what had happened, a futile wish that it was all a nightmare, a terrible misunderstanding, anything but the truth. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember much of it, just a sense of autopilot, my body moving mechanically, my mind still trapped in that loop of shock and disbelief. When I walked into our apartment, it felt alien, unfamiliar, like I was entering someone else's space. Every object, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, seemed to mock me, to remind me of the life we had built together, the life that was now irrevocably tainted by her betrayal. Sarah was already home, sitting on the couch, watching television, seemingly oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered our world. She glanced up as I walked in, a casual, almost indifferent look on her face. "Hey," she said, her voice flat, devoid of warmth. "You're late. Dinner's in the fridge." Her nonchalance, her utter lack of awareness of the emotional turmoil raging inside me, was like a slap in the face. It amplified the pain, intensified the anger, deepened the sense of betrayal. How could she be so normal? How could she act like nothing had happened, like our world hadn't just imploded? I wanted to scream, to yell, to confront her right then and there, to unleash the torrent of emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the shock, by the sheer weight of the revelation, by the fear of what would happen next. I just stood there, staring at her, my mouth dry, my throat tight, unable to speak, unable to move. She looked at me, a flicker of something, annoyance? Impatience? Crossing her face. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. "You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost? Yes, that's exactly how I felt. Like a ghost haunting my own life, watching my own marriage crumble, powerless to stop it. I wanted to tell her everything, to confront her with the evidence, to demand an explanation, to scream out my pain and anger. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped in my throat, choked by emotion, by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. The trust, the love, the years we had spent together. All of it felt like a lie, a cruel illusion that had just been shattered, leaving me standing amidst the wreckage, alone and heartbroken, grappling with a truth I never wanted to face. The irrefutable evidence was there, burned into my memory, etched into my soul. And with it, the complete and utter collapse of everything I thought I knew about my wife and my marriage. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the television and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Sarah's casual indifference, her oblivious demeanor, it was a stark contrast to the emotional earthquake raging within me. I knew I couldn't keep it in any longer. The truth was a pressure cooker building steam inside me, threatening to explode. I had to confront her. I had to hear her explanation or denial, or whatever twisted version of reality she was going to try and spin. I finally found my voice, though it was raspy, strained, barely a whisper. "Sarah," I began, my voice trembling slightly. She glanced up from the television, a hint of annoyance still lingering in her eyes. "What?" she snapped, her tone impatient. "Can't it wait? I'm watching something." Her dismissiveness, her utter lack of empathy, fueled the anger that was simmering beneath the surface. It was like she was deliberately trying to provoke me, to push me to the edge. "No, it can't wait," I said, my voice gaining a little more strength, a little more steel. "We need to talk." She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes, finally turning off the television with a flick of the remote. "Okay, fine," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "What's so urgent?" She still hadn't noticed, hadn't sensed the storm brewing inside me. Or maybe she had, and she was just playing dumb, pretending not to know. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in my voice, trying to gather my scattered thoughts, trying to find the words to express the devastation I felt. "I know," I said, the words heavy, leaden, hanging in the air between us. She frowned, her brow furrowing slightly. "You know what?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion now. "Know what, David?" She was starting to sense it now, the shift in the atmosphere, the weight of my words. "I know about you and Mark," I said, the words finally out, raw and exposed. The effect was immediate. Her face paled, her eyes widened in shock, her body stiffened. The casual indifference vanished, replaced by a look of panic, of fear, of guilt. For a moment she was speechless, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Then the denial came, swift and vehement. "What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice shaking slightly. "Mark? That's ridiculous. We're just colleagues. We work together." Her denial was weak, unconvincing, her eyes darting away, avoiding mine. She knew I knew. And I knew she knew I knew. The charade was over. "Don't lie to me, Sarah," I said, my voice hardening, the anger finally breaking through the shock and pain. "I know. I saw you. Last night. Leaving his apartment." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation, with undeniable truth. Her denial crumbled, her facade shattered. She looked down, avoiding my gaze, her shoulders slumping, the fight draining out of her. Silence descended again, thick and suffocating, broken only by her shallow breaths. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. How did you know?" she asked, her eyes still fixed on the floor. The question wasn't a denial, it was an admission. She wasn't denying the affair, she was just asking how I had found out. The betrayal deepened, the pain intensified. She wasn't even going to try and explain, to apologize, to offer any semblance of remorse. Just, how did I know? I didn't answer her question directly. Instead, I asked my own, the question that was burning in my soul, the question that had been tormenting me for weeks, months perhaps. "Why, Sarah?" I asked, my voice filled with pain, with a desperate plea for understanding. "Why did you do this? Why did you betray me? Why did you throw away everything we had?" She finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears now, tears of guilt or self-pity or maybe even regret. "I couldn't tell. I didn't care. It just happened," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It wasn't planned. It just happened. The classic cliché. The pathetic excuse. It just happened. As if infidelity was some kind of accident, some kind of unavoidable force of nature. As if she had no agency, no choice in the matter. My anger flared again, hotter, more intense than before. It just happened? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You just accidentally ended up in his apartment at midnight? You just accidentally started an affair with my wife. She started to cry, the tears streaming down her face now, but her words remained hollow, empty of any real remorse. I'm sorry, she sobbed, her voice muffled by her hands covering her face. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? I echoed, my voice rising, my control slipping. Sarah, you've ripped my heart out. You've destroyed our marriage. You've shattered everything I believed in. And you say you didn't mean to hurt me? The confrontation was over, but the questioning had just begun. And the answers, or lack thereof, were more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Heartbreak. It's a word we use so casually, so often, to describe a bad breakup, a romantic disappointment. But what I experienced in the days and weeks following Sarah's confession, it was beyond heartbreak. It was soul-crushing devastation. It was like a part of me had died, a vital organ ripped out, leaving behind a gaping wound that refused to heal. The pain was physical, visceral, a constant ache in my chest, a tightness in my throat, a leaden weight in my stomach. It was emotional, psychological, spiritual, a complete and utter unraveling of my sense of self, my sense of worth, my sense of reality. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Nights were endless stretches of darkness, filled with racing thoughts, agonizing memories, and the constant, gnawing pain of betrayal. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence amplifying the turmoil in my mind. Every memory of Sarah, every happy moment, every shared laugh, every tender touch, was now tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of her infidelity. The beautiful tapestry of our past was unraveling thread by thread, leaving behind a tangled mess of pain and regret. When I did manage to drift off, nightmares would plague me, vivid, disturbing dreams of betrayal, of loss, of loneliness. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the pain even more acute, more real than in my dreams. Eating became a chore, a mechanical function devoid of pleasure. Food tasted like ash in my mouth, my appetite vanished, replaced by a constant nausea, a churning unease that made even the thought of food repulsive. I lost weight rapidly, my clothes hanging loose on my frame, my face gaunt, my eyes hollow. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The man staring back was a shadow of his former self, a broken, hollowed-out shell of the person I used to be. Work became a refuge, a temporary escape from the constant torment of my thoughts. But even there, the pain followed me, a dark cloud hovering over my head, casting a shadow over everything I did. Concentration was impossible, focus elusive. I'd stare at my computer screen for hours, my mind blank, unable to process even the simplest tasks. Colleagues noticed, of course. The forced smiles, the strained greetings, the concerned glances, they were all reminders of my broken state, of the visible signs of my inner turmoil. I withdrew, isolating myself, avoiding social interactions, preferring the solitude of my pain to the awkward attempts at sympathy and support. Loneliness became my constant companion, a heavy shroud enveloping me, suffocating me. Even when I was surrounded by people, I felt utterly alone, separated from the world by an invisible barrier of pain and grief. The world outside went on, life continued, people laughed, loved, and lived, oblivious to the devastation that had consumed my inner world. I felt like an outsider looking in, a ghost haunting the fringes of life, no longer a part of the vibrant, joyful world I once inhabited. The question, why me, echoed endlessly in my mind. What had I done to deserve this? Where had I gone wrong? Was I not good enough? Was I not lovable enough? The self-doubt crept in, insidious and corrosive, eating away at my self-esteem, my sense of worth. Sarah's betrayal wasn't just an act of infidelity, it was a rejection of me, a devaluation of everything I was, everything I had offered her. The worthless comment, though it hadn't been uttered yet, was already implied, already felt, a silent accusation hanging in the air between us. Her actions spoke louder than words, screaming that I was inadequate, insignificant, dispensable. The pain was all-consuming, relentless, threatening to drown me in its depths. I felt like I was drowning in an ocean of sorrow, gasping for air, clinging to fragments of hope, only to have them snatched away by the relentless waves of despair. The future stretched before me, bleak and empty, devoid of hope, devoid of joy, devoid of love. The life I had envisioned, the future I had planned with Sarah, was gone, obliterated, replaced by a gaping void, an abyss of loneliness and despair. Heartbreak wasn't just a feeling, it was a complete dismantling of my emotional landscape, a shattering of my inner world, leaving me adrift in a sea of pain, lost and alone, with no compass, no direction, no hope of rescue. The haunting of what happened, the constant replay of betrayal in my mind, became my new, agonizing reality. The initial shock and raw pain began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard reality. The marriage was over. Irreparably broken. There was no going back, no mending the shattered pieces, no salvaging what was left. The trust was gone, evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind only a barren landscape of betrayal and resentment. The question wasn't if we were going to separate, but how and when. And the even bigger question, the one looming over everything, was the prenup. I remembered the prenup, of course. We had signed it years ago before we got married at the insistence of my father, a pragmatic man who believed in planning for every eventuality. At the time it had felt transactional, cold, almost unromantic. But Sarah had agreed without much fuss, understanding, or so I thought, the practicalities of protecting premarital assets. We were young, in love, and the idea of divorce seemed so distant, so improbable, that the prenup felt like a formality, a piece of paper with no real significance. Little did I know how significant it would become. As I started to contemplate the logistics of separation, the prenup resurfaced in my mind, a faint glimmer of something. Not hope, not exactly. More like a sense of protection. A safeguard against further devastation, a barrier against potential financial ruin on top of the emotional wreckage. I dug out the document from its dusty corner in a filing cabinet, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded the crisp, legal paper. Reading through it again years later with the cold clarity of heartbreak, I realized just how ironclad it was. It meticulously outlined the separation of assets acquired before the marriage, and even, crucially, addressed the issue of assets acquired during the marriage, stipulating a clear division in case of divorce, heavily favoring me in certain scenarios due to my significantly higher income and premarital wealth. At the time, it had seemed almost unfair, weighted so heavily in my favor. Now it felt like a lifeline. I knew instinctively that the prenup was going to be a major point of contention, especially now with the lottery win. Just days after I discovered the affair, just as I was grappling with the devastating truth of Sarah's betrayal, news broke that someone in our city had won the $15 million lottery jackpot. And then the sickening realization dawned on me. It was Sarah. She had won. She had kept it secret, of course, another layer of deception, another betrayal of trust. The money, the sudden influx of wealth, it changed everything. It amplified the stakes, it complicated the already messy situation, it added a whole new dimension of bitterness and resentment. The decision to invoke the prenup, to stand my ground, to protect myself financially wasn't easy. Part of me felt conflicted. We had been married for years, we had built a life together, however flawed it now seemed. Did I really want to be that guy, the one who hid behind a prenup, who fought over money in the midst of heartbreak? But another part of me, the part that was still raw and wounded, the part that felt betrayed and devalued, screamed yes. Yes, I deserved protection. Yes, I deserved to be compensated in some small way for the emotional devastation she had inflicted. Yes, I deserved to safeguard my future, to prevent her infidelity from financially crippling me as well as emotionally destroying me. The conflict between reason and emotion raged within me. Reason told me to be pragmatic, to be strategic, to invoke the prenup, to protect my assets. Emotion screamed for justice, for revenge, for some kind of retribution for the pain she had caused. But revenge wouldn't heal my heart, and bitterness wouldn't rebuild my life. Ultimately, I chose reason, practicality, self-preservation. I decided to consult a lawyer to understand my rights, to prepare for the inevitable legal battle. The decision was cold, calculated, devoid of emotion, but it was necessary. It was a choice born out of pain, out of betrayal, out of a desperate need to reclaim some semblance of control in a life that felt completely out of control. The prenup, once a forgotten piece of paper, became my shield, my weapon, my unexpected ally in the fight to salvage something from the wreckage of my marriage. Recovery. Healing. These are words that sound so simple, so straightforward. But the journey from the depths of heartbreak to even a semblance of normalcy is anything but. It's a long, arduous climb, fraught with setbacks, stumbles, and moments of despair. There's no quick fix, no magic cure, no easy way out. It's a slow, painful process of picking up the shattered pieces of your life, one by one, and trying to glue them back together, knowing that the cracks will always be visible, the scars will always remain. The initial weeks and months after the separation were a blur of legal battles, financial negotiations, and emotional turmoil. The prenup became the central point of contention, exactly as I had anticipated. Sarah, emboldened by her lottery win, and perhaps fueled by a sense of entitlement, refused to accept it. She hired a high-powered lawyer determined to challenge the agreement, to claim what she believed was her share of the marital assets, lottery winnings included, despite the clear stipulations of the prenup. The legal process was draining, both emotionally and financially. Lawyer fees mounted, court dates loomed, and the constant back-and-forth negotiations felt like a never-ending cycle of stress and anxiety. Sarah's lawyer painted me as a cold, heartless man, hiding behind a prenuptial agreement to cheat his deserving wife out of her rightful share of the winnings. The media predictably sensationalized the story, portraying it as a battle between a greedy husband and a wronged wife, conveniently ignoring the context of infidelity and betrayal that had led to the divorce in the first place. Despite the pressure, despite the negative publicity, despite Sarah's relentless attempts to invalidate the prenup, I stood my ground. My lawyer, thankfully, was excellent, experienced, and unwavering. The prenup, as ironclad as it was, ultimately held up in court. Sarah's attempts to challenge it failed, and the judge ruled in my favor, upholding the agreement. The relief was immense, a weight lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about principle, about justice, about refusing to be further victimized by her actions. It was about reclaiming some control, some agency, in a situation where I had felt utterly powerless for so long. But the legal victory, while significant, was only one step on the long road to recovery. The emotional healing was a much more arduous, much more personal journey. I sought therapy, talking to a professional counselor who helped me process the trauma, navigate the complex emotions, and begin to rebuild my shattered self-esteem. Therapy was hard, uncomfortable, often painful, but it was also essential. It provided a safe space to explore my feelings, to confront my demons, to start to make sense of the chaos and pain. I also leaned heavily on my support system, my family, my close friends, the people who had stood by me throughout the ordeal. Their love, their understanding, their unwavering support was a lifeline in the darkest moments. They listened without judgment, they offered comfort without pity, they reminded me of my worth when I couldn't see it myself. Their presence, their belief in me helped me to slowly, gradually start to heal. Small steps forward became significant victories. A day without crying. A night of uninterrupted sleep. A meal eaten with genuine appetite. A laugh shared with a friend. These small moments of normalcy, of joy, were like beacons of light in the darkness, guiding me forward, reminding me that healing was possible, that life could and would get better. Forgiveness, both of Sarah and of myself, was a long and difficult process. Forgiving Sarah didn't mean condoning her actions, or minimizing the pain she had caused. It meant letting go of the bitterness, the resentment, the anger that was poisoning my own soul. Forgiving myself meant letting go of the self-blame, the self-doubt, the feeling that I was somehow responsible for her infidelity. It meant accepting that I was not perfect, that relationships are complex and unpredictable, and that sometimes, despite your best efforts, things fall apart. Recovery wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about learning to live with it, to integrate it into my story, to emerge from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. Looking back now, years later, the pain is still there, a faint ache in my heart, a scar on my soul. But it's no longer the raw, gaping wound it once was. It's healed, closed over, a reminder of a painful chapter in my life, but not something that defines me anymore. The experience with Sarah, the betrayal, the divorce, the legal battles, the heartbreak. It was the most devastating period of my life. But it was also, paradoxically, a period of profound growth, of unexpected learning, of surprising resilience. One of the biggest lessons I learned is the importance of self-worth, of knowing your value, independent of your relationship status, independent of someone else's opinion of you. Sarah's worthless comment, though never actually spoken directly to me, was implied in her actions, in her betrayal, in her devaluation of our marriage. But her opinion, her actions didn't define my worth. My worth is inherent, intrinsic, something that no one can take away from me. It took time, therapy, and a lot of self-reflection to truly internalize this lesson, but it was crucial to my healing and my ability to move forward. Another lesson, perhaps a more pragmatic one, is the importance of prenuptial agreements. They may seem unromantic, they may feel cold and transactional, but in certain circumstances, they can be a vital safeguard, a protection against financial devastation in the event of divorce. The prenup, in my case, wasn't about distrusting Sarah when we got married. It was about being responsible, being prepared, being realistic about the uncertainties of life. And in the end, it was the prenup that protected me, that allowed me to emerge from the wreckage of my marriage with my financial stability intact, enabling me to rebuild my life without the added burden of financial ruin. I also learned about the importance of communication, of honesty, of vulnerability in relationships. The cracks in our marriage started long before the affair, with subtle shifts in behavior, with unspoken anxieties, with a gradual drift apart. If we had been more open, more honest with each other, if we had addressed the issues earlier, perhaps things could have been different. Perhaps not. But the lack of communication, the avoidance of difficult conversations, undoubtedly contributed to the breakdown of our marriage. And finally, I learned about resilience, about the human capacity to heal, to adapt, to overcome even the most devastating experiences. I didn't think I would survive the heartbreak, the betrayal, the pain. There were moments when I felt like giving up, like succumbing to the darkness, like letting the pain consume me. But I didn't. I kept going, one day at a time, one step at a time, supported by my loved ones, guided by therapy, fueled by an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. And slowly, gradually, I emerged from the darkness, scarred but not broken, changed but not defeated. Looking to the future, I am cautiously optimistic. The scars will always be there, a reminder of the past, but they are also a testament to my resilience, my strength, my ability to heal. I am open to love again, to relationships, to the possibility of a future filled with happiness and connection. But I am also wiser, more discerning, more cautious. I will never be as naive, as trusting as I once was. But perhaps that's not a bad thing. Perhaps the pain of the past has made me stronger, more resilient, more capable of navigating the complexities of relationships with greater awareness, greater wisdom, and a deeper understanding of myself and what I truly deserve. And to anyone going through something similar, know that you are not alone. Healing is possible. Recovery is achievable. And even after the darkest storms, the sun will eventually rise again. Hold on to hope, seek support, and never, ever forget your worth. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope it offered some insight, perhaps some comfort, or maybe just a moment of reflection. Remember, these are real stories shared anonymously, reflecting the messy, complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking reality of human relationships. If you have your own story to share or thoughts on this one, please feel free to leave a comment below, anonymously if you prefer. And if you found this story impactful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to bring these important voices to light. Until next time, take care.